shit, or leadoff hitter analogy, but when you go to sports analogies, it's just bad territory.
As long as you go football, you're good.
As long as you go football,
There's
no equivalent of a leadoff hitter.
new president's name right
I guess the
But anyway,
Quarterback?
no, like the kickoff.
It's not better.
It is a kickoff.
I think she'll be pretty innovative.
Yeah.
She's
Could be an onside kick here.
a big idea person.
She has a Twitter account that she follows. That's a good sign.
Well, hey, let me tell you, I want to tweet all my stitches every morning here.
It's not on there, so he just wants to get feedback.
I figured they were all worried about it.
Yeah.
So I had to say,
Yep, he's good.
we'll see.
Matt, everybody sees Matt right now.
That's what they're
The
all-
Twitter or the streaming world.
All the time.
Your
space
space
Wanna
is
go,
basically
but no, it's like
I gotta be on this side of the room?
nobody on the left.
I'm sure he'll, I guess, because he's got his
It's
camera
just
set up back here.
Amazing to me.
So I'm sure he'll adjust
I'm a
it to
roamer.
wherever Alan roams.
I'm a roamer.
I think that we go to bed at night.
Hello, Internet.
You know it, you get up in
Yeah,
the
that's-
morning, it's changed. But anyway, thank you. And we usually do keep.
Well, now Alan's sitting there waving.
I usually do.
Right.
Okay.
So here's where you are. You're still, it's gonna be weird because you're gonna see yourself in about a 15-second delay. Right, to go. Wow, is that disturbing?
I just wanted to go back in time.
Yeah.
Can you make that go back 3 years ago?
No, that's all you want?
I made it, yeah.
So as soon as we come back with the audio.
Grab lunch.
Well, I already brought them back.
Oh, okay.
At least have the chocolate. Yeah, that's right. You don't have chocolate chip cookies, you're not. People are raging and clamoring.
Use the.
Use
Really? Just hand me the food. I mean, if I,
couple, what, 1,000?
yeah.
So there's definitely things I missed.
I keep these around. Make sure the riffraff don't get them. 1980s technology, but still works. Ah.
Now, for the audio in the back, are you going to be able to, for your recording, sorry. Oh, you got mics here, so that'll come out. The Streamlight good audio. Yep. Or reasonable audio. Yeah, all right. So we need
I can say the word good.
let's
Reasonable.
reasonable audio.
We give what we're requesting. Here we go.
All right, I'll do another.
Okay.
I'm gonna go get Good. All right. You heard it? The audio okay?
Not like it. Oh, there it is. No, that's it.
All right, we are good?
1 minute.
All right, 1 minute it is.
How's the sandwiches? How's the sandwich, Pete?
Good. Sorry with the cookie.
We really need more cookie sandwiches, I would say. Now, are you doing Q&A? Or how do you want to do it sort of structured, or what's your thinking?
There will be no questions.
Good, good.
They can just interrupt me.
All right.
There will be a quiz after lunch.
Yeah, on edX. We'll send you a link to the MOOC. All right, so we're good?
Yep.
Okay, well, I'll just do a quick introduction. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. This is the first session in a series of events that we have going on that's sponsored by the Link Research Lab. So within Link, we have 4 primary research areas, just by way of a little bit of introduction. We are looking at better understanding the knowledge and technology process. What happens when we start to use technologies to interact with one another, and how does it impact how we create and share information and knowledge? A second key area relates to the ways in which we are seeing changing employment cycles. What's happening as the growing quantity of interactions that are mediated through technologies, but increasingly those tools start to automate that experience and that process. So what happens to work and the nature of work, and how does a university contribute to helping individuals become part of whatever economy we're seeing emerge? A third area we're quite interested in relates to underrepresented students, or success for all. As the greater portion of society completes higher education, we need more nuanced and more complex strategies and approaches to make sure that everybody that's involved successfully completes the educational process. And then the final point that we're looking at is around the future of universities. What happens to higher education when we have different control points than we've had in the past? We're no longer the central node, but we're part of a broad network that's involved in educational and learning experiences for individuals involved. So with that, those are the 4 key areas that frame our interest in the Fall Speaker Series. And I'm very pleased to have Alan Levine join us to kick off this particular series. I've known Alan probably since early 2000 or so. At that point, he was one of the first bloggers that I started following online, at a point in which blogs still didn't mean a whole lot. It just sort of seemed like something you do after a night of heavy drinking. And all of a sudden, we, as this momentum continued, and Alan moved into a range of spaces, always well ahead of the technology curve, but also in terms of application, not just what is the tool or the technology, but what does it mean and what's its impact. Some of his work more recently, which I think is extremely interesting, and some of the most fascinating and innovative work that's being done in the education technology landscape right now, is around the ideas of connected courses, aggregating content, reclaiming your digital identity, and taking ownership of the spaces where you interact. So it's a huge pleasure to be able to introduce Alan Levine as our kickoff speaker. Thanks, Alan.
Hey, thank you, George. Love your blog, George.
Oh, thanks, man.
Keep working at it. Great to be here. I was thinking, I don't know if you read recently a piece by Clay Shirky, where he really decided to put a ban on laptop devices in his room. So I went, everybody on the internet, you need to close your laptops right now. Sorry, that's supposed to be George. Laptops closed. So it's really great to be here as the kickoff speaker for this series. When George asked me to do this, I sort of have an idea what I wanted to talk about. I do not have any key technologies. I'm not giving you a list of iPad apps. I'm not even going to give you any answers to anything. I'm going to hopefully get some questions going. And when I came up with what I thought was a clever title, did you wonder whatever happened to wonder? I find my brain works in these Vannevar Bush's associative trails, but mine are of trivia because I grew up with this technology. I was raised by TV, so I watched a lot of TV. And I don't know how many people remember 60 Minutes and Andy Rooney?
Someone gave me this book. It's called The Intelligence of Dogs. It's a good book. The author obviously knows a lot about dogs.
So Andy Rooney was kind of like this crotchety old uncle who talked funny, probably smelled funny, but occasionally he said something interesting. And so I always he's always, do you ever wonder about, and then he would talk about things like, you know where the I don't have shoelaces, but those little things on the tips of your shoelaces? He did a talk on that once. So Andy Rooney, weird guy, kind of inquisitive, but also for me, I started thinking about was I really informed? I mean, how much did this shape a lot of my thinking, this TV? Because TV, as I knew it, is nowhere near TV the way George's son watches TV, right, Jason? He watches what he wants. So these are big questions. These are huge questions that I'm not going to answer, but I think they're important. So the theme of what I want to talk about sounds ridiculous. What kind of internet do you want? What would you like the internet to be? If you could design the internet to do the things you want, I certainly have some ideas about what I want and don't want on the internet. and the way I want it to function. And is that really what we have on the internet? That leads to the next question. Who is deciding and shaping? So there's a lot of concerns because what started out as a research project and sort of an independent movement of people just trying to explore new technologies is now part of the whole commercial infrastructure thing. So now we have to worry about Google's, what they're doing with our data every time we go into Gmail. And of course, what Facebook is doing when they're experimenting with their interactions. So who's in charge here, but also, who gets to put their fingers up and say, like, I don't really want all that going on with my interactions on the internet. I don't have the answer for that. And then, of course, how do we go about answering this question? So that is my dog. That is my 2002 iBook. And that is Second Life. So there's a little bit of a retro thing going on here at the same time. And so indulge me with a little bit of nostalgia. A couple weeks ago, in fact, I think it was like last week, it was even as I was working on this, as it happens when I'm looking things on the internet, I usually find what I'm not looking for, but I find something else. And I found this clip from a TV show, TV retro, 1993, Computer Chronicles.
Marshall McLuhan said that one day we will all live in a global village, an electronic community interconnected by communications networks that would shrink the earth. Well, the global village has arrived, and its main street is called the Internet, where people from around the world do meet electronically to exchange ideas. Today, we'll surf the net, we'll explore the Internet on this edition of the Computer Chronicles.
You can almost hear the air quotes. 1993, people didn't know. Who was on the internet in 93? All right, a few of us here. Just showed our age, okay? But you can always hear, we're going to surf the internet, because it was strange and it was different. And he's talking about it on TV. And I'm going to come back to a couple little clips from this, from 1993, because I think it's, well, I like history, but I think it's interesting to think about the ideas about where this internet came from and where we are right now. I have to let you know I see things positively. I see potential in everything. So I'm an optimist. I believe in unicorns and rainbows and all that stuff. I'm a little bit of a pragmatist, but there's a lot of things to be pessimistic about these days. But when I started, someone's trying to come in? Hello?
I think you're close enough.
That's okay. When I started on the internet, this is what it felt like to me, and this is what it feels like most days. It was like a crazy party. And when I first started creating web pages, I put my name, I put my email address on thousands of web pages I made at Maricopa Community Colleges. Who would ever put their email address on a public web page? Because you know what happens. There was no idea that people would spam you with unwanted email. There was no reason not to believe. And it was exciting because everything was new and everything was full of potential. So on this 1993 show, there's this guy who I'm actually working with on a project now, this connected courses class that I mentioned, Howard Rheingold, a real pioneer on the internet. And he's talking about the potential for online community. So here's to you, Howard, if you're watching on the internet.
So you can talk to people who have similar problems that you might not otherwise be able to meet or get to have this conversation. Right?
Yes, in fact, you can have a kind of ready-made community when you need one. One real example of that was when one of the members of the community discovered that his son was diagnosed with leukemia. So he opened a topic on the well, gave a little introduction to that topic in which he discussed what was happening to him and his family, and really within minutes, other people began flocking to his help. And it was not just emotional support. There were a couple of doctors, a couple of nurses, and a couple of recovered leukemia patients. So that's kind of priceless help you get from people you may have never met before, but the well or other communities put you in touch with them.
Howard, what's the social significance of this? Is this really a major change in the way human beings may interact with each other? You're suggesting that instead of leukemia cases.
Well, I believe that it is. You have to remember that in democratic societies, citizens talking with each other is very important. We've lost a lot of that with the mass media.
So yeah, we've lost a lot of the individual communications with the mass media. He said in 1993, may want to think about where have we gone, was it 15 years later? Do my math. Interesting, I mean the stuff, he's scrolling by stuff that's all text. You probably couldn't read it. It had 1991 dates. But he's talking about things that I know I've experienced in my interactions on the web, where people individually will help each other out. without any expectation of return. So again, here's to you, Howard. You're awesome. So again, my image of the internet is all the bubbles blowing in the street, Mardi Gras. In education and other worlds, we're faced with a lot of things that make us worry. Does anybody worry about the internet? Only a few of you? You don't worry about the internet, do you? Totally, you don't care. They're stealing your identity. Anybody had their credit card hacked? Yeah, how was that?
Yeah, it was not from an internet dating site.
Oh, internet dating site. You shouldn't date on the internet. Okay, I'm just kidding. So there's a lot to be worried about. The last one I put up here, this just happened. Nude celebrity photos, the hacking of iCloud, and the things that happened because of that. I read a story that because of that rumor going around that there were nude celebrity photos on the internet, it shut down the internet in New Zealand. Seriously. I'm going there in a week. I'm going to ask them all about that because I want to understand, what are you guys looking for? But there's a lot of things to worry. What I've tried to tell people, and what I try to keep in mind, all the stuff that we see, the potential of the goodness and the potential of an open communication system, it has to have a dark side that's a complement. You can't have one without the other. It doesn't mean you have to spend a lot of your time in the dark side, but to have one, you have to acknowledge and be aware of the existence of the other. We don't like the other. We want to protect our students from things that are bad. We don't want the technology to expose them and have their identities hacked. But sort of like, if you want to be able to have the wide open sharing and potential, you have to at least know that there's the potential for this dark side happening. Doesn't mean it has to happen to you. You may not want to, put your credit card on an internet dating site. Anybody remember this show? Time Tunnel? Wasn't that amazing? These guys walked down this tunnel and lights would go off and they would be transported in time. I'm retro. I'm going to take you back in time. So let's go back to 1989, 25 years ago. So that was me, if you can't tell. 1980s hair, horrible fashion sense. I was a graduate student in geology at Arizona State University. I did not have a computer. A phone was a thing in my apartment that was attached by a cable, to a thing that I dialed probably. No, it wasn't that long ago. I think I pushed buttons. But in '89, I had actually, as a grad student, I started to do some things. There were these email listservs, and that was kind of some of my first exposure to the internet. But this isn't about me. 1989, Bush and Gorbachev got together in Malta. They declared the end of the Cold War. It was the beginning of a new era of peace. Look how far we've come with our relationships with Russia. I'm supposed to laugh. Okay. That's ironic, I thought. Earthquake in California about 2 weeks ago. Everybody read about that? Shook up the wine industry. 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake in San Francisco did a lot more. Collapsed the Bay Bridge like a pancake. A lot of damage from that. But also, things weren't all bad in San Francisco. The 49ers won the Super Bowl, for those who are football fans. And not only that, the same year, just a couple weeks after the earthquake, they had a Bay Series World Series, Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants. And the Giants won. So San Francisco, yeah, they got the earthquake, but they won 2 major championships. Also, popular book, Joy Luck Club. Grammy Award winner, Bobby Farron. Anybody tapping toes? You guys out there? Internet? You know these voices?
Definitely know this car.
What movie?
Straight 8, Fireball 8. Only
Green Man.
8,005 production.
Look how young Tom Cruise, even Dustin Hoffman looks young there, 1989. And, again, because I grew up on TV, this wasn't even the TV of my generation. I Love Lucy. Lucille Ball passed away in 1989. But even more than that, we lost Mr. Howell, the voice of Mr. Magoo. Jim Backus passed away in 89. And also 1989, there was this one vague but exciting idea that I want to tell you about. So for that one, I got to go back in the time tunnel a little bit to the mid-'60s. There's a boy growing up in the UK. His parents are both academics, so he reads a lot. And he's kind of fascinated by this one particular book that he finds in his parents' library. And it's called Inquire Within Upon Anything. It was written in the Victorian era. I think it was published 1890-something. And it was more or less a book that contained a lot of information about the world. But it wasn't a book that you read from start to finish. it had a particular organization within it that he could find information, and that kind of fascinated with him. So in this book, Inquire Within, you might not be able to read this, but on the title page, whether you wish to model a flower in wax, and just for parallel, I did some YouTube checking. So there's a lot of videos about how to model flowers in wax. I don't know, are there any wax flower models out there on the internet? Hello? Okay. To study the rules of etiquette, lots of videos on the YouTube about etiquette. How to make relish recipes, lots of stuff on YouTube for that. Planning dinners, like thousands of millions of YouTube videos. Curing headaches, all kinds of methods. How to make a will, lots of wedding videos. To bury a relative, I didn't find too many videos on YouTube about that. But it's interesting, sort of the kinds of information that was in this Victorian era of books that now you can find actually pretty easily in more than text on YouTube. So the whole idea about this book was a place, whatever you wanted to do, make, or enjoy, they hope that you don't fail to find it. And the drive is inquire and look. So they don't promise to give you everything, but they say we just might have. So just to let you know how it works, this book is on Project Gutenberg, and it's all hyperlinked. So just so you're having to browsing through and say, oh my gosh, somebody I know apparently died from death, from drink. They look like they're dead. What do I do? Well, there's an answer for that. And you look, and at a unique identifier, 1336, it tells you what to do. Raise the head, loosen the clothes, maintain warmth of the service, and give a mustard emetic as soon as possible. Kind of brief information. But look at what we have here. Like, you might see that, but say, well, maybe there's a hanging. So there's adjacent information that's kind of related. I can't say that word. Suffocation from noxious gases. So he was really fascinated by the way this book was organized, and that this index made it seem like it was like this gateway to a portal of information, like almost more information that he could understand. So this book kind of stayed with him as an interesting idea. He studied some computer stuff. He went to work for a science lab. Does anybody know where I'm going with this? Don't say. So, and then he happened to invent this thing called the World Wide Web. That was Tim Berners-Lee. And when he wrote about this, to me, when I think about the web that I want, I really go back to sort of his original idea for this. A common information space in which we communicate by sharing information. So I'm not going to quiz you on whether that's the internet now, but to me, that is like the essence of what I believe in for the internet. And he wrote about it in '98, sort of a reflection. Come on in, grab a sandwich. That's not for you, internet. You don't get any sandwiches. But I think it's really interesting to sort of see what his vision was for this web. He mentions it as being universal, so universality. But the importance of the link, and the link is the magic. Yeah, I mean, you click on links all day long, right? But do you think about like what a piece of magic that is? Anybody? Anybody? You? Matt? You guys awake out there? Just checking. So yeah, the link's amazing. But also that it can be, it can be local. It can be anywhere around the world. You can connect anybody. I think this is really important. It can be draft or highly published. So it doesn't have to be like magazine quality. It can just be an idea, or it can just be, maybe you just love roast beef sandwiches. So you can write about roast beef sandwiches. That's a magical part of the link. And the reason he did this, it wasn't just because he thought it was interesting technology. He had a problem to solve at CERN, which is a physics research lab, is that there's probably like this university here. There's a lot of things going on, and it's hard to connect or track what's going on. So he wanted to build a system to connect it. He wrote this proposal in March of 1998. I think this is great. The person he sent it to wrote on top, vague but exciting. Okay? So imagine where we'd be right now if you had a different supervisor and said, vague, now get back to programming that library database. There'd be no web, right? Or it would be the web invented by AOL or somebody else that we don't know. It's one of these parallel future. Any science fiction people out there? Yeah. Wouldn't that be a great science fiction story to do a parallel universe where Tim Berners-Lee got fired for his radical idea? Vague but exciting. Also, as teachers, think of the impact of that work, that feedback. So if your feedback was vague and needs a lot of work versus vague but exciting. So, obviously in your feedback, give people something to shoot for positively. I also thought it's interesting that he talked about it being a possible realistic mirror of how we live and work. So an interesting question is that how the web is now? I mean, I have my own idea about it. In a way, it may be somewhat of a distorted mirror of reality, but like think about anything that we do on a regular basis that somehow that hasn't impacted. And pick your industry of publishing or travel, et cetera, or shopping, et cetera. And I'd say that part of the vision has largely come true. And then last, what I think is most interesting is that once this information is out there in this hypertext environment, this universal place connected by links, it's going to help us make sense of what we're doing and how we fit in and how we can better work together. That's a great thing. I mean, that's worth blowing bubbles over, right? So, I mean, there's I could go on for days with different examples. I love this example from my colleague Alec Kuros. Reddit is a weird place, okay? Is anybody, any Redditors out here? Yeah, more than usual, okay. So it's an unusual place. For some people, it's just way too much and way too bizarre. But there's some wonderful things that happen in Reddit. So this is one example. This has happened a couple times. So a man posted that his son Dexter sadly passed away from leukemia at 3. And he had a picture, but he said, anybody out there who's got good graphic skills, can you help create a better version of this? Because the picture's not very good. So the original picture, it's actually not bad, but he took it with an iPhone, and as it does, the iPhone locked the focus on the trees behind. And so Dexter and Mom and the flowers are a little bit out of focus. I would say, I would frame it a little bit, rule of thirds going on, but it's a snapshot. So people responded. So someone went into Photoshop probably and masked out the background and blurred it out to make it would look like if you had locked the focus on Dexter. Someone else took that one and did a nice artistic tracing, different rendition. They changed it even more. And then even flipped it around. So people spontaneously heard someone say, hey, can anybody help me do this? And they responded in droves. It sounds pretty simple, but to me that's like Tim Berners-Lee's vision come true. Back in 1993 on the Chronicles, I found this really interesting. This is a guy from Bellcore. You remember Bell Labs, researching and helping build the initial internet. So this was kind of the industry perspective.
For creation called Superbook. It's a hypertext interface that lets internet network providers offer large searchable databases.
What Superbook will do is allow them to maintain their document database in a central location on the internet and then put out their documentation, whether it's a journal or some other set of materials, to a whole variety of end-user workstations ranging from an ASCII terminal all the way up to a very fancy workstation.
We're interested in making a more effective public communications network. And by public, we mean something open to everyone.
So rather interesting, the providers of the backbone and the structure of the internet, we're talking about providing public information. He didn't say it, but I kind of inferred for free. The first guy talking about the Superbook kind of suggested that the internet providers sound like would be providing the information, so maybe that part didn't pan out. But I think it's interesting that in this early stage of the web, not necessarily the early stage of the internet, the people building it were talking about it like a public good. That's changed a little bit. So more time tunnel again. I happened to pick 1993. It just happened to be the same year as this video, but it was also my entry into this field. My hairstyle hasn't improved, still wearing 1980s hairstyle in 1993. My first year on the job at the Maricopa Community Colleges as an instructional technologist, supposedly helping Betsy Hertzler on something, showing her online, etc. The picture's a little bit of fake because I never really used a PC, but that's just a prop. But when I got this job, I was actually completely unqualified for it. I studied geology, okay? But I had a little bit of computer background. And at the time, I was trying to learn how to produce multimedia. And there weren't really books out there capable of doing this. But I came across the Sing, an FTP site, so basically a remote site that I could log into, the Stanford Sumex AIM archive, and I was programming in HyperCard. And basically they had these directories of different categories of information. And people were uploading examples and code that I could download and open and learn from them. And that really informed the way I thought about information on the internet, because basically I learned everything I know about the internet on the internet from sites like this. Also interesting that most of my access at the time was through like a VAX terminal, but then there started to come out a graphic client. So this was an actual screenshot I had of a tool called Fetch, to look at that same information. And for me, because I think the web history is important, this site is still there. The information is totally irrelevant, right? Because how many people program in HyperCard anymore? But because people care about sort of the history of this information, I love that they sort of maintain the archives. I think that's important. So my life changed in October, I forget the exact date, 1993. I was at this event at Phoenix College, a colleague named Jim Walters. And this is a great example of, to me it's like a teaching moment. He wasn't a teacher, but he was a mentor. He didn't try to say, here's this technology, it's going to change your life. This is exactly why you need to do this. He handed me, you can see the old media form, he handed me a floppy disk, and it just said Mosaic on it. He didn't tell me what it was. He said, just try this out. And I did. It was a Mosaic browser, and it changed my life. So 1993.
Mosaic was developed by the National Center for Supercomputing Applications with ARPA's support.
The thing that makes Mosaic special is that it gives everyone access without there having to be a rocket scientist. They don't have to be trained in esoteric.
I like the guy from NASA saying you don't have to be a rocket scientist. I feel like he's got a lot of jazz hands going on. But the message was, what Mosaic did for the internet was open it up to people, because all the other things before that were pretty arcane. When you watch some of the other episodes on the series, there's this people, he's like typing command lines to get to Gopher, etc. So before that, finding and using information on the internet was a pretty tedious task. So Mosaic changed all that. So now I'm going to tell a couple stories, because I'm up here and I can tell my stories. But these are things which represent my idea of the internet that happened to me because I learned from my experience in finding and learning from the web that I wanted to give back. So I can't even say this word, but because of the web, I ended up in Iceland. And it began because when I got interested in the web in '93, I wanted to turn some of my teachers that I worked with at Maricopa onto this. And I basically taught them HTML, how to create their own web pages. It made sense at the time when I did my first workshop. Rather than putting together a bunch of PowerPoint slides, it's like, we're talking about the web, I should do this on the web. So I built a tutorial and we ran it off of the website. But I didn't even realize that because I put this online, other people could use this. So over the years, I added to it. I lost track, maybe 3,000 people had sent me messages about, thank you for this is what I did. Not quite massive, but I thought that was pretty big. People on their own decided to translate it into Spanish and Japanese. And then I got an email from this guy in Iceland. And he said, do you mind if I translate your tutorial? It would be useful for the teachers I work with. And I said, yeah, but it's about like 250 different documents. And so I mailed it off to him. I forgot about it. And a couple months later, he emailed me this link. And I was like, I recognize that. But I can't read it. So he translated, and this is actually still online at that URL, the Icelandic translation of my work. And this is Gujan. He's a teacher who lived in this little town called Ísafjörður. And so in 2000, he actually hooked me up with some teachers who were having a meeting. My hair still hasn't changed all that much. But I got to go to Reykjavik and do a workshop with these teachers in Iceland, and that's the group of teachers. And then I actually flew in a little plane up to northwest Iceland and met this person who kind of just volunteered to translate my work online. And so that was a great sort of accidental benefit that happened because I put that tutorial online. An interesting thing is that this was the web address where I initially put the stuff. The Icelandic translation's alive, but they took all my stuff offline. I had a bunch of bad Perl scripts and stuff that was just prone. So I've been sort of reclaiming all my work I did at Maricopa, so I published this on my own site. So there's an element to the how part of what I mentioned, is that the internet's not done to us. We actually make it, so we can sort of fix things. If someone takes your favorite site offline, about the Internet Archive, of course. You can find websites that are gone. the Internet Archive has saved my butt many times because often I've thrown away my own stuff by accident. But also that we can sort of come up often with our own interventions around when someone puts an obstacle up. Again, going back to 1993, I love this, talking about sort of NASA's idea for the Internet.
All of this technology may show up soon in schools nationwide.
In 3 to 5 years, we expect to be able to put this technology into every school system in the country and share it for use in distance learning. And it can also be used for sharing valuable resources like a gifted instructor or a researcher in a wide area setting.
So they're talking about NASA was experimenting with video conferencing. And before that segment, they said, right now it's 2 frames per second, and they hope to get it up to 10 frames per second. The NASA dude said, in 2 to 5 years, we hope to see this in every school in the United States. Are we there yet, anybody? We might be, actually. Hopefully we're better than 2 frames a second. Another accidental story. This is something my dad used. In the 1950s, he was trying to figure out what he was going to do in life, and he enrolled in he was a distance learner. He enrolled in this school in Chicago in a certificate program to become a construction cost analyst. So in those days, the technology of distance learning was getting stuff in the mail and mailing it back in. But he had this little folding drafting table that he did his work on. And when I moved west, I asked him if I could take it with me because I came out to Arizona with just a car and it folded up nice, and I thought it was kind of neat. So I still have it. And a couple years ago, 2008, I decided it was kind of beat up, so I decided to sand it and restain it. So as I do, I usually post things on Flickr of what I'm doing. And I do like put all my stuff up Creative Commons because I like people to have access to my things. And I got this comment from someone, and he said, and I love this, it's kind of like a teachable movie. He said, I'm not going to tell you why, he says, but expect in a couple days for the views on this image to go through the roof. And I was like, well, I don't really know why. Well, he took that photo and he put it into a tutorial on a Photoshop technique on how to make, this is like a computer-generated version of a blueprint sitting on my dad's drafting table. But the tutorial tells you how to do some techniques to distort the perspective and give a little distortion and shadow. It looks like a real piece of paper. And he was right. That the views on that picture went way up. I thought, well, that's pretty neat. That's kind of cool. That thing happened in a tutorial. And then, like 4 years later, I got an email from a guy who was a biology researcher, and he again asked permission if he could use the photo because he was going to submit something for the cover of a biology journal. And I learned a couple years ago, like when people said that, I used to all right, I'm going to educate them. This is Creative Commons. Actually, you do not have to ask me to do this. And then I realized, like, if people didn't ask, although they didn't have to, I wouldn't know that they were using my stuff. So now I just say thank you. But anyhow, his cover was picted. So my dad's drafting table had this guy did a different thing to represent his research. I can't understand his research. But it's the cover of Cell, which, are there any biologists in the room?
I know what Cell is.
It's pretty important, right? Yeah. So it's no big deal. So does that mean anything in the long run? Maybe. But this kind of like informal sharing is the stuff that fascinates me. And so this is my ultimate story, if that doesn't impress you. Jason, you're hooked, right? So I studied geology. I don't know flowers very well, but I like taking pictures of flowers, and I get a lot of wildflowers in my yard. So this is a picture of an orange flower that I grew, and I found something interesting that when I posted these on Flickr, if I put in my description or the tag unknown flower, some people randomly would just comment and tell me what it is. I think that's kind of neat. Like, are people out there looking for information to add? Well, you've heard of Wikipedia, right? But they're doing this in lots of places. So I thought it was kind of worth sharing. I was doing a very similar presentation to this in 2007 in Hobart, Tasmania, on the other side of the world. And so I was telling this story. So these are all the pictures. You can tell this is old because of the old Flickr interface, for those who use Flickr. And I said, I could tell you a story about any of these. And I asked the audience, which one should I use? And someone says, take the yellow one, the first one in the second row. They could have picked any one of these. Okay, this is important. There's like 12 of these. They picked that one. So I gave them the story that I just told you, and I told them how someone named Kirsty S. said, I suspect it is ranunculus, or whatever, I can't pronounce that. And I thought, there it is, that's kind of neat, right? And so this hand goes up in the back of the room, and just for reference, I live in Arizona, I'm way down here, and this hand goes back of the room, and she says, that was me. The woman who commented on my Flickr photo, who I didn't even know was in my workshop in Tasmania. Like, I don't know, my heart stopped. Like the workshop went out the window. And everybody got up and cheered, and we hugged, and we went on with the workshop. But that's, I mean, what are the odds, against that happening? George, you can figure this out. So yeah, and so an act of serendipity.
Radio station, which you pull up when you want. You come in the morning, a phone call comes in, you put the radio on hold. You decide you're tired, you put it on hold again. You cut out the part you don't like. You just chop it out. You don't like my restaurant reviews. I love doing restaurant reviews, but you don't like them. You just want to hear the technical meat. You cut them out.
This non-linear digital approach to journalism raises both ethical and procedural questions that Malamud looks forward to discussing on the Internet.
We need to start seeing the Nina Totenbergs of the world showing up on the Internet, and we also want the individuals of the world being able to publish themselves.
I think that's really interesting. This guy's name is Carl Malamud. He invented the first internet radio station, and he's talking about it here in 1993. But I think it's really important what he said. First of all, he says the whole thing about the internet is you don't like the way I produce something, listen to it differently. Like, pick your own path. You don't like the class I'm teaching here at UTA Arlington, pick your own path through it. But I love this last little segment. He said, he kind of preludes and he says, I think people should be publishing themselves on the internet. Very foreseeable. So, very foreseeable. So, very inspirational person to me, this guy, John Udell. He was there at the beginning of the internet, did a lot of research with, was it PC or Byte magazine way back in the 90s. But he said this thing that has really stuck with me about the importance, and he got this from watching how programmers did and shared their work. They wrote about the work as they did it. He called it narrating our work, narrating the process of our work. And that to me, and I think it's what he was speaking to, is the idea about blogging. So blogging means many things to many people. In the first days, it was like online, diaries, which always sound kind of silly because it was chronologically ordered. But the importance he was stressing is, what would it be like if people sort of just talked about how they solve problems? So, you hire a guy to fix your stopped-up toilet. The plumber comes in, he fixes it and goes away. Do you know how he figures out like problems and solutions? Do you know how his mind works? Like if he had a plumber's blog and he wrote about the way he solved problems, you might be able to learn something besides about how to fix your own plumbing, but how people think. So this idea about narrating the work that we do in these blogs and sharing that is part of, again, going back to Tim Berners-Lee's thing about stuff being on the web that's draft, and that's really part of the mirror of the life that we live every day. So to me, this is the reason I blog. Not for, like, if anybody comments, I do it for myself because it helps me to organize. So I have 11 years of stuff, and I can't tell you how many times I'm trying to say, I think I did this before. So I use it for the search function, mainly for myself to figure out. But also, I can tell you, pick any month, year, day in the last 10 years, and I can go back and tell you, do you know what you're doing in June of 2008? What was important to you? You don't have to answer. But I have this record of sort of, sometimes it's like just stuff I was reading. Sometimes it's about projects I was working on. But when you're in the middle of a project, right, everything is like forefront. It's like at the top of your mind. When you finish that project or that course and move on, it starts to get fuzzy. I mean, you remember the details because your focus is somewhere else. The blog is one way to sort of like track that own a bit of work. So there's sort of it's becoming sort of this fashionable thing right now. Austin Kleon's a digital artist, and he's got this great little book about showing your work. And it's the idea about the process of things we create is as important as the things that we create themselves, the how we made things. There's another book in the the training and development industry by Jane Bozarth with the same title. So this idea about narrating your work really is at the core of this digital storytelling class that I've been part of for the last couple of years, in that it involves people creating a lot of media. But when I ask my students to create something, it's not about just producing the final product. They write on their own blog why they chose that as a subject, what was the inspiration, where the sources came from, how they made it. It's all about narrating the things that they produce and producing it. So a big part of DS-106, which is a presentation in itself, the work at University of Mary Washington on that sort of that concept and the evolution has evolved this thing called a domain of one's own. You may have heard about this project. They are giving, it's a liberal arts, small liberal arts college. They don't have a big IT budget. They're not Stanford. They're not UT. Just kidding. But they're giving every incoming freshman their own personal domain, web domain that they choose, and access to a free web hosting platform for 4 years. So students may be told for a particular class that they have to create a website to do something, but students can also choose to do things that are on their own interest. So if you go to this site, just watching the featured sites go by is a sort of an amazing show of the range of possibilities that students and faculty are doing with this platform for self-publishing. Jim Groom and Tim Owens, who are behind this, have sort of extended that with some money that they got from the Shuttleworth Foundation. They set up this outfit called Reclaim Hosting. So they've been doing this for years at UMW. They're offering it to anybody as educators who want to set up web hosting for educational purposes for $12 a year. Okay, that's the registration cost of your domain. They're covering the hosting, and also even if you have a class where you want to be able to give out domains to your own students, it's a whole management system for this. It's a model of teaching courses that I've been involved with on a number of places besides DS-106, where students, participants, do work in their own digital space, and we use syndication technologies to bring it together. There's a class going on right now because there's a lot of interest in this, being supported by the MacArthur Foundation Digital Media Lab, called Connected Courses, connectedcourses.net. So it's a bunch of people coming together. It's an open course and how you build open courses. So if you've got any passing interest in this, you can sign up. There's a no apology clause for dropping out because dropouts don't exist, at least as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't always have to be hosting your own domain. So I taught a version of this class for it was George Mason University last spring. And so I just had my students create free accounts on WordPress.com. But still, it becomes a personalized space for them to create and do the work. So things change when they write about their work in an LMS that belongs to UT Arlington than when they work in a space that's there. So this is a person who, she traveled a lot around the world as part of her work. These were all people who work for a major consulting firm. And she always used sort of her own images and sort of things she had as travel as part of her work. And so even you can see it, chronic wanderlust is in the name that she established. So she picks her own identity on the internet. These kind of stories that I sort of shared my own, my trip to Iceland and the flower thing, I've really been fascinated by these, so I've been collecting these over years. I call them true stories of open sharing, things that have happened to people unexpectedly because they share things on the internet. A couple times when I've done this presentation, because every time I sort of ask people, they're like, oh, that's a great project. And then I say, like, where's your story? And they say, like, oh, no one really cares about that. Or it really wasn't that big. Or it's not really as good as George's story because that was really a good story. So it's really interesting about this question about what are the barriers to sharing. So when I did this presentation on an open course a few years ago, we did this in Illuminate where I put up I did the Dave Cormier method. I did a white blank slide and asked people to put up the reasons why they don't share. And so I see presentations done by some educators of a big voice online. It makes me reticent to share. Me too. So opening up may expose themselves. So this idea of sharing is like something that I think we learned in kindergarten and forget by the time we get educated because we have all these concerns about how will we be perceived. So I think it's an interesting issue. Just a couple examples. Just so you know what kind of stories are in there, Jess McCulloch is a teacher down in Australia. She shared something online. She got invited to speak at a conference in Hollywood. She does a great video. Oops, I forgot those videos in there. Jonathan Worth, professional photographer. He realized because of the way digital image media was changing that the way photographers made their money by controlling the distribution didn't work. So he completely reinvented the way he approaches the field of photography. Skip you, Jonathan. And then Donna Fry is an educator who lives way up. Thunder Bay is way up north, George, right?
It's way up.
Yeah, on top of the Great Lakes. So she did this little collaborative project with her students at the time of Commander Hatfield being up in space. And she sent him a message and said, our students did a remix of your video. And she just sent him a tweet. And he responded. And not only that, they featured her video on things. So small things that mean a lot to teachers while they're sharing. So great video of Donna talking about it in the snow. So the thing about these barriers, and sometimes I speculate, because obviously we don't want people to fail or have bad experiences in these online spaces. So we often want to I think overly try to make things safe for them. So to me, learning happens when we go beyond what we think we can do. So not so far that we drown, but get in the mud, figure out what your comfort level is and see what happens when you try something just a little bit outside your bound. And especially in something like the DS-106, which is the open course in digital storytelling, connected courses. You're not getting graded on these, and this is a chance for you to interact, to practice connecting with other educators, and see what happens when you learn. So this last little clip, Mr. Computer Chronicles, I forget his name. He's talking to this guy named Brendan Kehoe, who wrote one of the first books about the internet. I see Pete shaking his head. Zen and the Art of the Internet. It was kind of one of the first books about the internet. And so he's talking to him before he gives a demo here.
And we're back here with Brendan Kehoe, and you've logged on to Internet Brendan. Before we take a look, what's the big deal about the internet? Why is everybody making such a fuss about it? Why is it better than CompuServe or Prodigy?
Well, the chief benefit is that it's not owned by one company or even a conglomerate of companies like Prodigy or CompuServe. You're influenced by what those companies thought your users would want to do. Where on the internet, anyone can put any service on and have it do anything they want with it at any time.
It's kind of user controlled.
Right. It's completely molded by the people who use it.
All right, let's take a look and show me some of the neat things you can do on the internet.
You have to go back and watch the video to see all the neat things that Brendan showed. If you couldn't hear that, what he said was, the great thing about it is that no one company owns it. It's up to individuals. And you might ask yourself, is that really the way the internet's working these days? So, who really calls a lot of these shots? And think about it, and write to your local congressman and the FCC and ask them what they're doing about net neutrality. So that was the internet in 1993. But I really still like this concept of this book that inspired Tim Berners-Lee. There is this giant thing of information out there. You might have to look, and there might be things in there that you don't find that you're looking for. Generally, you're going to find things that you don't expect to find. It happens to me on an hourly basis, and I think it's still like the party place with all the bubbles. So I left about 5 minutes, and no room for questions. But thank you for listening and putting up with my nostalgia and my 1980s hair and comments. This is just me saying I love the internet. That's basically the message. The internet's been very, very good to me. Anybody get that reference?
Do you have any questions or comments that you want? We've got a couple minutes here for at least a question or comment. Your internet story?
You're Frank. What's your name?
Sorry, Peggy.
Peggy.
Peggy
You, philosophy? No.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Lost our heart.
Don't apologize for philosophy. It's a great subject.
So I think I've asked this question before in another type of presentation, but how do we change? the culture in academia to be more sharing and open, because I often find I share and I want to model that for my students and peers, in subtle ways, but I don't know that everyone's on board with that. I think of terms like knowledge guardian and knowledge hoarding, and so how do we overcome that?
Boy, I wish I had that answer, because I've been trying for like 20 years, and I think instead of thinking you can change a lot of people, you kind of do a lot locally, and especially influence your students. So I'm working with a class right now. It's somewhat of an open course, but students are doing this blogging thing, and these are mostly, first or second year students in the Netherlands taking an engineering class. But we had them set up they have to do their reflections in their own Tumblr site. And so it's rather amazing. I would say, I've checked the feeds for about 80 students who have registered. Just about all of them said, I've never done this before, I don't know what it's like. It's really new to people. And again, everybody comes in pre-wired with this self-conscious, what are people going to say? So I think the answer is giving people some of the here's an analogy. Totally, I don't know if this will work. I can't ice skate, okay? I live in Arizona. But I was up in Canada, and a friend of mine said, let's go ice skating. And so we got ice skates on me, and I was a mess. I was doing everything wrong. And there was this 8-year-old girl. She's like going around skating backwards and spinning around, and she was going to teach me how to ice skate. So basically, she just said, baby steps. Just take baby steps. And so, that's my answer. See how you can influence, model, encourage, look for things that people can do and have some success in. I feel like I'm giving such general pat advice. It's probably stuff that you know. But it's like being that little, what's the analogy about the little rudder that turns the big rudder? So to me, that's about the best that you can do. That's totally unsatisfactory. No, you're nodding politely.
You're ventriloquating Laurel. The exact same thing. Probably word for word.
It's the same book.
Same internet.
It's the same book. And, if you look at it, if you want to look back and see where people were, you have people now who are at least in the space who weren't there before. And they're having some of this experience. And this is why we do these open courses, to give people sort of a generally a no-risk place to have some of this experience that they can go back to their classes and say they can try things. And a lot of times, you don't see the direct impact. So you'll be working with someone, and they'll be just like, I don't know if I can do that. And then you give up on them, and then years later, they'll come back and say, this is what I did. So don't discount what you're doing right now. The impact may not always be right away. And that happens a lot with students, too. They'll do this stuff in your class because it's your class, and then you might get, anybody who's a teacher probably has had these students who have come back and told you something that, were you really in my class? You went out and did that? So people will surprise you. It's just the impact isn't always as fast as you see. So, for years I would try to, at Maricopa, wikis came out, and I could try to get people excited about wikis. No one takes it up. Okay, I'll move on to blogs. Take a long time. And then someone a couple later says, that wiki thing really worked out for me. And it's like, I already gave up on wikis. Try blogs. So people don't always move at the pace you'd like them to, but the whole point is maybe that they move.
Great. Well, we're at the top of sorry, quick question?
But all the stories that you have shared are the good stories.
That's a really good question. I'm glad you, what's your name? Leela, I'm glad you brought that up, because that exact thing happened in a different presentation, and I was kind of stumped, and this woman said, she says, I've got one that didn't go well, and she teaches, I think, a computer game design class, and she thought it was a good idea for her students to create a computer game and submit it to a competition. And they did it, and whoever the judges were in the competition completely raked, gave them horrible reviews, and she felt really bad that the students had this experience of sharing and put their thing out there in public, and then some of the people on the site tore things apart. So,
It's good. It can go either way.
It can go either way, and I think, honestly, no more analogies about falling down and things like that. But we don't learn by making mistakes, and we're trying to prepare people to live in a world where there aren't all the guide rails and safety things around them, and trying to navigate it. So I think school and university is the ideal place to be screwing up.